All right, today we are going to be going over steak and butter gal's cholesterol levels. Now, some of these numbers are very, very scary. Some of these numbers improved significantly, and we'll go over why. And we'll also go over why some of them are very, very scary. And we'll dive really, really deep, because this is something that I think a lot of people need to understand, so that we know how to analyze cholesterol, why it may have improved. She went from a standard diet, or I don't know what her previous diet was, to a carnivore diet. She says she's been doing this for 5 years. This is the girl that you see on TikTok. It's a little bit younger and is downing like sticks of butter, eating ribeyes, cheeseburgers, all of that. Now, for those of you who don't know, I'm Dr. Allo. I'm a board-certified cardiologist, double board certified. I'm currently in the process of finishing up a book on cholesterol. This will be like the new go-to book on cholesterol that everybody hopefully in the future will be reading and referencing. This is the lipidology textbook for non-cardiologists, for non-lipidologists. So that's kind of my intro. If you like this kind of stuff, follow me for more. But anyways, let's go through her labs and kind of take a look and see where she was before. And I'll put the graphic up here, where she was before and where she is now. Now, I will mention that she's had a lot of doctors on her program to discuss her labs, and I'll put a picture of those people up as well. First of all, some of them are not doctors. I can guarantee you none of them are cardiologists. If you look at the list of doctors, and I'll put a picture of them, not one of these doctors is a cardiologist. None of them is a lipidologist, which means none of them know anything about cholesterol lipidology. The one that comes the closest is a cardiothoracic surgeon that she brought on. Anybody who works in the medical field knows that cardiothoracic surgeons know nothing about cholesterol. They're very good at rearranging your arteries, replacing your valve, but they do that and then they never see you again. They are not trained in the long-term care of chronic disease, cholesterol, or any of that. Now, I love cardiothoracic surgeons. I work with them. They are my friends. They do a really, really good job at what they do. And we try to do a really, really good job at what we can do. And when you're not trained in something, one of the first rules in medicine is usually try not to comment on it. So let me put up her labs right now, and we'll kind of go through those. Her name is Bella. That's why it's labeled Bella's Lab. So let's go before carnivore. And she actually has this labeled as vegan. So before carnivore, here's what her labs look like, and I'm just going to read these to you. Her total cholesterol was 173. And then maybe we'll just compare them straight to carnivore. So her total cholesterol was 173. On carnivore, it was 365. Her HDL, which if you guys have been watching my stuff for a while, you know that's a nonsense marker. We do not really care what your HDL is. We actually now call that highly disappointing lipoprotein, because that's how much we don't care about it. It has not shown or proven to be cardioprotective, and may or may not be, and we just don't really know enough about it. We kind of just ignore that one. Based on the current status of the data, it's generally not important at this point in time. The next one is her LDL, and she puts it in quotation marks that it is calculated, which is fine for the vast majority of people. Unless your LDL is super, super low and you're on statin therapy, it's pretty accurate. So hers initially was 81 on vegan, and now it is 264. Her cholesterol to HDL ratio, I don't even know why that's listed. That's not a marker of concern. Her triglycerides went from 97 to 15, and we'll talk about why that may have happened. Her hemoglobin A1C went from 5.5, so quite pre-diabetic, to 4.7, which generally a little bit insulin resistant, but definitely nowhere near, the pre-diabetic range at all. And you could probably just take her off the pre-diabetes range. CRP went from non-existent to 0.3. Again, not really a marker we care that much about. I'm not sure why that was even checked. 0.3 is also, it depends on what. Is it in milligrams? Is it in nanograms? I mean, it doesn't in millimoles. It doesn't really say, but generally, if I'm thinking the normal way that we report it in the United States, 0.3 is not really concerning. It is higher, and we know that red meat and saturated fat is very pro-inflammatory. Probably all the doctors that she interviewed did not tell her that much. Vitamin B12, again, not really something of concern, at least definitely not to a cardiologist. So let's go through these one by one, especially the ones that really make a difference. So her total cholesterol went up to 365. It was 173. The normal now for total cholesterol is 150. the new highest cutoff. We want people generally to be under 150. Now, this is not a hard target because generally speaking, there's no data or not enough data to support a target for treatment for total cholesterol. But generally speaking, if you're under 150, about 70 to 80% of that is usually LDL cholesterol, and that'll put you around the 100 mark. And that is actually the goal of therapy, or the target for everyday folks with a normal lifestyle, no sickness, no illness, no chronic disease, no atherosclerosis, no heart disease, no heart attacks or strokes. Normally, we want most people under 100. If you look at her labs from before, her LDL cholesterol was actually 81. Now, in a young, healthy person that's otherwise doing very well, no atherosclerosis, never had a heart attack or stroke, no family history, no diabetes, none of that stuff. Although you could maybe make the argument on the diabetes on her, but generally speaking, an LDL cholesterol of 81, we'd probably just leave it alone. Now, if you're one of these people that wants longevity and health span and lifespan and you want to optimize everything, yeah, you probably want to be under 55 and some people under 40. The latest guidelines do state that if you're having multiple ischemic events, whether they're strokes or heart attacks, revascularization, open heart surgery, whatever, then you definitely want to be under 40 on your LDL cholesterol. In her case, she's not had any of these things. You could argue plus or minus one risk factor. She was, in her mind, slightly overweight and has lost weight, and she was in the pre-diabetic range at least, or very and quite insulin resistant, and now that has improved, and we'll get into that in a second. The next number that was listed is this ratio. Cholesterol to HDL ratio is not a number of concern. A lot of people want to say, well, my triglycerides to HDL is this, and my total cholesterol to HDL is that, and my LDL cholesterol to HDL cholesterol is this. Using HDL in any denominator or numerator is incorrect and invalid. The HDL, and I have a whole chapter about this in my new cholesterol book. If you want it, go to drallo.net/cholesterol. You can sign up to be the first to know when it's going to come out. We are like this close. We're just going through some final edits. It is a book that is been endorsed by some of the biggest names in lipidology, cardiology, the president of the European Atherosclerotic Society, some of the biggest names in cardiology that you see online, whether they're on here or TikTok or any other place that you can find them. This is like the biggest, greatest, one of the cardiologists that said this is going to be the most important book of our time. And there's obviously lots of people on there: Danielle Belardo, Dr. Thomas Dayspring, Dr. Professor Kausic Ray, Lane Norton, Matthew Nagra, Alan Aragon, Simon Hill, Ron Grisanti, Terry Simpson, Matthew Phillips. The list is quite long. Oh, Dr. Patty Barrett. I'm trying to think of some more. Anyways, it's a really long list. Maybe I'll just put the names up here. But you can go to drallo.net/cholesterol and get to that. So ratios don't matter. Whether it's triglycerides to HDL, total cholesterol to HDL, LDL to HDL, whatever, anything with HDL or any ratio in your lipid panel is not concerning at all whatsoever, based on everything that we know in 2024. So just to let you guys know that. Now, the next number she reports is her triglycerides. They went from 97 to 15. Now, 97, anything over about 70-ish, you're probably insulin resistant. Now, there are ways to test this and check this. One of them is actually an A1C, and hers was 5.5 on the vegan diet. But also, people are now thinking, oh, well, if I just go carnivore, I can get rid of diabetes. No, you can't. Here's what happened. So this person is got the genes for diabetes. And if you don't understand diabetes, go watch some of my lectures on here on diabetes. You must have the genetics for diabetes in order to get diabetes. So if you don't have the genes for insulin resistance or diabetes, you're not going to magically get those genes or magically get diabetes. You must have the genetics for diabetes. There are 17 alleles at least that we know of. And that was back in like the early 2000s that we knew of the 17 alleles. There's way more probably now. But you must have the diabetes genes or the insulin resistance genes to get diabetic. Now, she states that she was overweight. She was about 20 pounds overweight on vegan, has lost weight, her skin cleared up, all this stuff. And now she feels so much better that she's on carnivore. She lost those 20 pounds and all her numbers got better. All her numbers got better with the exception of 1 or 2, which we'll talk about. When you lose weight, regardless of how you lose it, it doesn't matter what diet you do. Go watch my lectures on here. They're very long and I'm referring to YouTube in case you're listening to this on audio. Go watch my YouTube lectures on weight loss. There's like a 3-hour, lecture. There's a entire weight loss playlist. It's actually called the Ultimate Weight Loss Playlist. If you get through all those videos, you will have a PhD in weight loss. But she lost those 20 pounds. That's what made the triglycerides go down. And that's what made the A1C go down. Now, at a 5.5, most of you doctors are looking at me like, 5.5 is not diabetic. No, it's not diabetic. 5.7 is pre-diabetic. Above 6.5 is diabetic. Now, these are arbitrary cutoffs. We could have chosen a lower number once we started using A1C for diagnosis. But they didn't want to use a lower number because they didn't want to include a whole host of new people under the definition of diabetes. She is 0.2 percentage points, 0.2% away from being pre-diabetic. So she has insulin resistance genes if she were to gain weight, even eating carnivore. If she ate only butter and steak and ate 10,000 calories of that a day or whatever it was, and gains those 20 pounds back, which is not hard to do, she will absolutely go back to being insulin resistance with high triglycerides and generally low HDL in that case, because of the way, when you have triglyceride-rich lipoproteins, especially like HDL, you end up with a slightly lower HDL count. It can affect your LDL. That's way more nuanced. Read the cholesterol book for that. Now, the biggest problem is her LDL cholesterol. It went from 81 to 265 or whatever I said earlier. That is problematic. We now know, based on data, and I'll put the charts and the studies up here kind of as we go along, we now know that LDL cholesterol by itself has met the criteria. In research, we have a criteria for causality. Like, how can we say that X causes Y? Well, LDL cholesterol has met the causality criteria for atherosclerosis. So LDL by itself, without anything else. You don't need inflammation, you don't need arterial damage, you don't need diabetes, you don't need insulin resistance. LDL cholesterol by itself, if it is high, will cause atherosclerosis in most people. And LDL cholesterol, if we dropped it down to a number that is very, very low, like I said, watch my LDL targets video if you want more. But if your LDL cholesterol is quite low, below 55, like the Jupiter trial, for example, below 57, very minimal, if any, atherosclerosis. And in most trials, like the PISA trial, people with an LDL cholesterol below 60 milligrams per deciliter, no atherosclerosis. So we know somewhere around 55 to 60, most people will not have atherosclerosis. So this person went from an 80, which is just above that. She's still under 100, definitely not under 70, but a little bit more modification, maybe a very low dose statin could have got her there. Not that a 20-year-old, and I'm not sure how old this person is, but not that a 20 or 30-year-old needs to be on statins. But if their LDL cholesterol is 265 like it is now, and it's been like that for those 5 years that they've been carnivore, that's problematic. So that's one thing that is severely abnormal. And none of these doctors that she interviewed, and I watched a lot of their interviews, are giving her good advice. One of them is a family doctor. There was another one that's a family doctor, and I just don't. They're trying their best to analyze their labs. The one family doctor is like, yeah, you got the high HDL and all this. Like, they don't even know what they're talking about. They're using very outdated data from like 30 years ago. They've not read a study probably since then. Family doctors, they're good at managing cholesterol, when it's basic and in general, but not to the level of like a lipidologist or a cardiologist. So I think she's just getting bad advice from people that are trying but just don't know any better. She also is getting advice from basically scammers. Some of the people she interviewed that call themselves doctors, and I'm not going to say their names because, I don't want to embarrass people further, but some of these people that are calling themselves doctors literally have no medical degree and are not doctors. Some of the people she interviewed have no medical license. Maybe they were a doctor at some point in their life, but their medical license was suspended or taken away. She's interviewed a couple of surgeons here and there, which know nothing about, managing cholesterol whatsoever. And that's really problematic. She's getting advice from basically idiots that have no idea what they're talking about. And I don't like to denigrate people or call them names, but when you are purporting yourself to be a cholesterol expert and you're actually not, that's very problematic. You are misleading the public and causing more harm than good. The first rule in medicine was first do no harm. It's a Hippocratic oath. First, do no harm. You are doing a lot of harm by telling this young lady that her LDL cholesterol of 265 is okay. The other thing that you'll notice is that on carnivore, her C-reactive protein went up. It was previously 0 or undetectable. Now it's 0.3. Above 1 is generally problematic, and above 2 is quite inflammatory. She didn't list the milligrams or however it's being measured, but generally speaking, that's problematic. We know that saturated fat, red meat, is one of the most pro-inflammatory substances you can consume. The other one is salt. Salt is very pro-inflammatory. Saturated fat and red meat is very pro-inflammatory. If you're eating processed red meat like sausage, bologna, hot dogs, things like that, you are getting salt plus a lot of saturated fat plus red meat in and of itself. So those are all inherently problematic as well. So this whole video and this entire account is problematic on many accounts and in many different ways. I don't recommend that anybody follow this kind of diet. This isn't another one of these diets. It's in a long line of crazy diets that hopefully will die at some point and nobody will follow it. I cannot control people. If you want advice from an actual cardiologist, someone who understands lipids and isn't trying to sell you a fake false dream or trying to clog up your arteries for personal gain or to try to fool you in any way, I highly recommend you follow someone like myself or Dr. Thomas Dayspring. He's the lipid editor of my book, the co-editor or lipid editor of the lipoprotein and lipid sections of my book. And those are people that actually know what they are talking about. I'll put his picture up here. If you search his name, he comes up on a lot of podcasts and a lot of videos. Highly recommend that you follow people that know what they're talking about and just follow, like, and share this for people who want to learn more.